This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book What School Could Be.
O nei aloha he leina ni a alamawira uka. Kila kaukau hale akala pawehia e a puare. E lei ho he noa pauahi he mamoku pa kana ia puni. Punino I re aloha o ka palamai. Me he lama pio ole a maua nei rana. E aloha no
Hey everyone, this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast. I am your host, Josh Rapun. Listener friends, as 2021 comes to a close, I want to thank all of you for supporting this podcast, which features innovative educators from across the Hawaiian Islands. Our destination is 1,000 points of light. The wind is fully in our sails, and we are still firmly fixed on the North Star that is student-driven, real-world, joyful teaching and learning. Speaking of 1,000 points of light, my guest today is Darciann Baker, a very special educator at the Kamehameha Schools Hawaiʻi Island campus in Kea'au. Kamehameha Schools is a private school system in Hawaii established under the terms of the will of Princess Bernice Pauahi Bishop. The Kamehameha Schools consists of 3 campuses and 30 preschools educating over 7,000 young people of Hawaiian ancestry on Maui, Oahu, and Hawaii Island. Darciann is a Native Hawaiian woman born and raised in Hawaii. Her entire career has been dedicated to the perpetuation of the Hawaiian language. It is an endeavor she has held close to her heart ever since she found her Hawaiian identity when she was 15 years old. For the past 30 years, she has taught Hawaiian language at different levels and in different contexts, from preschool through the university level, at adult night school, and even in the prison system. Recently, Darciann, known as Kumu Lenani, stepped out of the classroom to become her campus's K-12 Hawaiian language coach. Her 2 main responsibilities in this current position are to help to transform the Hawaiian language program to best prepare students to be successful on their Hawaiian language proficiency graduation requirements. This includes rewriting the Kamehameha Schools Hawaii Island campus's K-12 curriculum, coaching teachers through new research-based strategies and modeling, innovative teaching, and co-teaching with proficiency as the focus. Makahana Ka'ike, in doing is learning. And now, here's my conversation with Darcy Baker. Darcy, welcome to the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast.
Aloha, Josh. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Good. It's going to be fun. So, Darcy, at Kamehameha Schools Hawaii Island campus, you are currently working to revamp your K-12 Olala Hawaii or Hawaiian language program.
Yes.
What's the difference between learning about language and doing the work of communicating in a language?
It's a huge shift. As a kumu, like a lot of us grew up or learned the language by learning the grammar, memorizing vocabulary, learning patterns, substituting words. We knew a lot about the language. And I can recall when I was first learning language as a junior in high school, I was great. I could write everything, but I couldn't speak it. I mean, you asked me to write a paragraph and I could just jot it all down. Mm-hmm. And as soon as the kumu asked me to speak, I was, mm-hmm. I'd be like, hey, really trying to think through what is that pattern that I'm supposed to be using. And so when we're revamping our program, we're moving toward a proficiency model where it's more important that the students learn to communicate using the language than to memorize vocabulary, memorize patterns, and all of the grammar, pilino olelo. And so, the revamp really is shifting toward that, the communication part, it's been a really hard shift for teachers, first of all, because we went through school thinking about accuracy. Everything had to be accurate because if it wasn't, you got that red mark on the paper.
Mm-hmm.
You were told that it was wrong and you had to fix it because if it's wrong, you're saying something different. So as teachers, it's really difficult to allow your students to make those mistakes and be okay with it. For students, that's also a big shift for them because they also feel that everything has to be correct. Is that right, Kumu? Is that right? But really trying to emphasize to them that communication is what we're trying to shoot for. We'll get the accuracy later, but communicate. And then one of the examples that I always like to use is think about our, Japanese tourists, because that's what we can relate to here in Hawaii. We have a lot of Japanese tourists. And when you listen to them, their English is not accurate. Their pronunciation is not accurate, but can you understand them? And that's a big eye opener, I think, for us as teachers and for our students.
Darcy, when I was in middle school and I guess in high school, my language experience was miserable. I mean, it was so traditional, and it was exactly as you described. It was a lot of memorization of certain kinds of rules. And then, and I did not do well because I didn't have a great short-term memory, and it was very frustrating to me. And then later, when I was an adult and I was actually finishing up my undergrad at University of Iowa, I was in a Spanish class and I was having the same problem. And so I dropped it and I took Latin. And then the whole thing shifted for me because that class and learning Latin was all about translation. And so we would read through the actual primary sources of, Virgil and Caesar and Cicero and have to translate it. And it was miraculous for me. All of a sudden I was having a wonderful time exploring language and figuring out the ways that language might affect my own ability to write in English, right? How Latin was changing that. And I wonder if that's similar to what you're talking about. Is that am I on the right track in saying that something happened in that switch from that traditional to doing Latin in the way that we were doing it?
I want to say yes. I'm not 100% convinced that translation is the way, but there's something that happens. It's a motivational thing. So students will be motivated when they can find success. So you might have found success in translation.
Yeah, I did.
Other students might feel success in saying something and having the teacher agree or disagree or just understanding, indication of understanding. And that might be their success. What we've been really trying to emphasize with teachers is really using learning targets and making the learning targets pretty specific. So bringing up the learning target at the beginning of the class and really making it evident for the students, making it visible and saying, by the end of this class, I will be able to do A, B, and C. And then at the end of class, really checking back to say, did you learn A, B, and C? Can you do those things? Did you evidence it today? And going through those learning targets is one of those things that we are hoping that students will find motivation in.
Yeah, got it.
Finding that success.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's so many different angles to it. Yeah. So we'll come back to the learning targets part in a little bit here, but I want to share with you that I live each day, and maybe I'm being overly dramatic here, but with some regrets about my teaching, most especially that in some cases at Punahou and Iolani schools, I taught history in the quote traditional way, meaning direct instruction, a ton of homework and traditional tests and papers. And my students exited my classes able to recite the facts of history, more or less, but very few of them had become trained historians. So you wrote to me that once you learned and understood the proficiency approach to language, you felt similar regrets. So I would love to hear you explain this in greater detail, including the moment, Darcy, when proficiency as a pedagogical practice showed up on your radar.
Yeah, I live with that regret every day. I think about the thousands of students that have gone through my classes. And I mean, there's a part of me that, I feel guilty, but then also I feel like I did the best that I could with what I knew. So it's kind of that balance. And a lot of this has to do with just me as a reflective educator. And I've been told before by my admin that I'm super reflective, and that every year I'm trying to think, how can I do this better? How can I do this better? And I'm always changing. And at one point I was told, you need to settle on something, Darce. But, I'm always trying to see, did I do the best that I could do? And my answer is always, I did, but I can always do better. I taught at the university for 13 years. While I was there, I mean, the university is where the grammatical structures was actually, I shouldn't say the grammatical structures were born, but how it was laid out and explained was actually conceived there at the university. And so I learned from those people who put that together and explained the grammar part. And so, for 13 years, I knew what I was doing, and I could explain it, very clearly to my students. And those who got it really got it well. In fact, can I tell you a story?
Yeah.
I have a former student. She's from Japan. She's Korean, raised in Japan. And she came to my class, and she almost dropped my class because there were, local students in the class who, when I asked what Hawaiian words did you know, they could rattle them off, right? Haupia, laolau, aloha, and all of those things. And they would sit there, the Japanese students would sit there and go, oh my gosh, I'm in the wrong class. Well, these Japanese students have discipline, right, when they're in school. And they did so well, memorizing and translations and all grammar. But she told me she graduated with a master's degree in Hawaiian, and she's back in Japan right now. And she just wrote to me like about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. She said, everything that you've ever given me for homework, and I taught her from 101, or was it 107? But from the very first classes, she said, everything, every worksheet, everything that you've ever given me, I still have. She said, I keep it. And it's like a Bible to me. She said, the foundation that you've given me is so strong. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy, because I'm thinking, oh, I did it wrong all of those years. But, there are some students who really thrive on that kind of grammar. And then some students just don't. And she, it was like the luck of the draw. Like, well, you did well. Sorry, you guys didn't do well. Right? And that's the guilt that I feel like I should have been able to hit more students, and I didn't, because I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't know that I was really hurting those other students. There's another student from my hometown on Kauai. And, he was my sister's classmate. So he's maybe 10 years younger than me. But I forgotten that I had him as a student. And my sister visited him this summer. And he's like, oh, yeah, I remember your sister's class. And I was like, oh, that's right. I did have him as a student. And he's still bitter to this day that he got a 91 when he needed a 92 to get a better grade. Yeah. And he's like, and your sister wouldn't give it to me. And I was like, oh, you earned that. Right? But it's those stories that I think, oh my gosh, how much did I hurt and how much did I help? Right?
And was there a particular moment that you remember where the proficiency model showed up for you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So that happened probably, I went to an ACFL conference in 2017. And ACFL is the American Council for the Teaching of Foreign Language. And I remember going to these sessions and listening to these teachers making that shift. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Wow.
We've been doing it wrong all this time.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went back to school, I stopped our headmaster, our po'o kula, and I said, we've been doing it wrong all these years. And her eyes lit up and she looked at me and she says, I've been waiting for somebody to discover that, because she had figured it out. But I guess she didn't want to be the hammer from up above to say, hey, you guys got to shift and this is how I want you to do it. Mm-hmm. And so she was so excited when she saw that the light went on for me. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where things started rolling for me. Mm-hmm. They recognized that I saw that there's a better way to do it.
Wow, that's such a great story. I had a similar, road to Damascus conversion moment when I started teaching at Punahou, and it was pretty traditional. But then when I went to La Pietra, which frankly was better, in terms of a conversion because I had much smaller classes. And so I had that privilege of being able to do that. But there was a moment where, as a history teacher, you sort of discover what it means to dig into the primary sources and have kids begin to discover history for themselves. And so I know what that moment is like. And so kind of along the same lines, Darcy, I know this sounds wacky, but I don't think we spend enough time talking about our feelings as educators. So if feelings emanate from the heart, what does it feel like to work with kids in a language proficiency setting? Like, how does it feel different to teach about a language as opposed to training kids, as you do, to communicate in Olelo Hawaii, in the Hawaiian language? How does it feel different?
Wow. So as a backstory, from 2017, when I discovered that we were doing it wrong, I immediately changed what I was doing in the classroom. And I decided that I am going to just speak Hawaiian to these students. And I remember that first year, it was 2017, 2018. I think that was that year. And I had been, I'd spent the whole summer kind of looking like, how do you do this? How do you do that? Of course, realistically, you can't figure that out on your own in a summer. Okay? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So like I said, you do the best you can with what you have. So what I did that year, I remember was so funny. It was like, I'm going to teach these kids in Hawaiian and they're going to be like so shocked, but I don't want to scare them. But I want them to understand that you don't need to know every single Hawaiian word to be able to understand me. Yeah, you don't need to know what pattern I'm doing. You don't need to know all the vocabulary. Just watch me and you'll get it. And so there was this one strategy I read online and I'm like, I'm going to do this. And what it was is, on the first day, you don't say a word. You don't say a word, but you have them do an activity. And all you're doing is miming. So I thought I'd take it one more step and make it a little more dramatic. And I put duct tape, green duct tape, bright green duct tape across my face.
Wow.
And they looked at me and they were like, what the heck is going on? I introduced myself, wrote it on the board, pointed to myself. And then this is really interesting. I had them introduce themselves by writing their names on the board, and everything I was just showing them what to do and they were following. They made name tags, name tents for their table. I had them make name tags for open house. So they needed to take pictures, write their names on it, poke holes in it, tie the string, put it in their folder for their advisory. We did all of that with no speaking. And at the end of class, I ripped off the duct tape and I said, okay, so you understood everything I said, but I didn't speak a word. And I said, yeah, we just watched you give instructions and we just followed. I said, great, because next time you come to class, I'm only going to speak Hawaiian and you're not going to understand everything.
Wow.
But all you need to do is follow and you'll be fine.
Wow. That's amazing. That's an amazing activity to make that point, right? To make that point. Yeah.
And then they weren't afraid. The next day, they weren't afraid. It was shocking because they couldn't understand, but they knew that if they just watched and they followed, that they would get it. And I remember that was they're going to be seniors next year, but they were 7th graders, and they loved it. The students loved it. And I remember asking them along the way, I'm like, so what did you guys learn about Hawaiian? What kind of things did you pick up that I didn't teach you? Oh, we learned that ina means if, and this means this. And how did you know? I never told you that. And so we just know, Kumu.
Wow.
I was like, oh my gosh, this is beautiful. This is so much fun.
I can imagine there must have been a real range of emotions happening in that moment, that it must have gotten, much more complex. I mean, sometimes I wonder that in our classrooms that there's only 2 emotions. Either I'm getting it and I feel excited, or I'm not getting it and I'm bummed out or anxious.
Yeah.
And it must have been much more complex in that moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So kind of staying with the feelings concept, my nephew, Evan Beachy, who works in strategy and transformation at Kamehameha Schools, described a moment walking and talking with you on your campus and suddenly coming up behind 2 teachers, both former students of yours, speaking in Hawaiian to each other. And Evan was very moved by your reaction, which I would love for you to share. Like, what were you feeling then? And do you still have those feelings today, 30 plus years into your transcendent teaching practice, which is now grounded so fully in proficiency? Like, what does it feel like when you see your students, especially in this case, because they were teachers, conversing, communicating naturally in Olelo Hawaii?
Well, the thing about, teaching, and especially teaching Olelo Hawaii, because Olelo Hawaii is very visible and audible, right? I mean, like teaching science, you're going to see your successes if they become scientists, right? But Olelo Hawaii, they don't need to necessarily become Hawaiian language teachers, but you'll be able to know that you had some part in it. And as a kumu, my reward isn't necessarily in the classroom. My reward will come years later. And having that feeling of knowing that your students have become fluent in Olelo Hawaii, and you know that it didn't happen in your classroom, but that there was a seed that was planted. For me, that is just the most amazing feeling. Yeah. I remember this one student coming back. She was probably from one of the first classes I taught at Kamehameha Schools. And she came back to visit on the campus maybe 3 or 4 years after she graduated. And she's sitting there and having this conversation with me in Hawaiian. And I was just like, oh, that is just so amazing. I mean, I'm like, oh my God, we're sitting here having a conversation in Hawaiian. And that was the first time I'd ever had that with her, because in my class, it wasn't like that. She wasn't at that point yet. And as a 7th grade teacher, you will not have that necessarily, because they're in the beginning of their journey. Now, hopefully in our K-12 revamp on campus, by the time they come to me in 7th grade, if they started in elementary, we'll be doing it in Hawaiian, right? If they start in 6th grade, they might be dabbling, and trying to get their feet more into it. But really, this revamp is so exciting. And so I'll leave it at that.
Okay. It's so cool because, as I mentioned, when I was teaching at La Pietra and I'd gone through that conversion, and now I was training them to be historians rather than just filling them up with information like the tops of their heads came off and I would pour stuff in, that was all gone. Right. And the kids, and it was so much harder for them to go through that process, but so much more rewarding. And I hear you when you say that, the reward is later, because for me, I have a number of students who've gone on to become teachers. And the thing that's really exciting is not that they went on to become history teachers or be historians, but the fact that they picked up the methods that I was using, my pedagogy in the classroom, that I didn't anticipate. I didn't know that at the time. And then later, they became teachers, and I saw the kind of practice they had, and I was like, oh my God, they were actually picking up pedagogy in the classroom. I was like, this is amazing, just like you experienced. So that's really cool. So look, back in 1993, I wrote what amounted to a senior thesis at the University of Iowa. Darcy, I'm 1/4 Welsh on my father's side. So my research centered on the ways the Welsh people back in the late 1800s and early 1900s successfully fought to bring the Welsh language back after several centuries of British pressure to stamp it out. And you shared with me that your hopes and dreams include like buying an outfit at Macy's or getting your driver's license renewed or doing a transaction at the bank in Hawaiian using Olelo Hawaii. But it seems the responsibility to make this happen lies as much with your thousands of students as with you. If they demand such changes, then those kinds of changes will happen. And I wonder what your thoughts are about this.
I do feel kuleana as far as, normalizing Olelo Hawaii. And, I've had this thought more strongly within the past year or so with this kuleana of normalizing Olelo Hawaii. And I know, there are immersion schools that are doing their part to really bring the language back and create more speakers. And I'm not thinking that I want to really tackle that, even though the work that I am doing is really to create more speakers. But what I'm thinking about is, how do I get those speakers now to connect? Yeah, I mean, there's, like 20,000 people who speak Hawaiian?
Yeah.
Yet in our communities, we don't hear it unless I hear maybe a mother speaking to her children or friends who know that each other speaks Hawaiian and that they're speaking to each other. But other than that, you don't hear it. It's not a normal thing. So how do I get to connect people? And I don't know if it's not my kuleana, maybe, because that's a huge responsibility. But I've been trying to brainstorm, like, how do I connect people? And I think I found a way. Okay. I'm not ready to share it, but I think I found a way to do that and really be able to connect people, strangers, to others who speak Hawaiian. And I'm so excited because when this launches, I think it's going to be huge, or it might just bomb. I don't know. But I have this sense of kuleana. And I'm doing this mostly because there was a unit that I wrote, and the unit was clothing, right? And one of the teachers shared with me that the students asked him, Kumu, why do we need to learn to ask how much that shirt costs? When are we ever going to walk into a store and ask the lady, how much does the shirt cost? And for me, that was an aha moment. And I was like, you know what? He's right. He's not going to be able to walk into a store unless we do something. And that's when this all started, like, okay. And somebody told me, Darcy, that's your kupuna talking to you. Because I couldn't sleep, honestly. I couldn't sleep. I was like, how do I do this? What am I supposed to do? And I was like kept up at night. I wake up like every 5 minutes going, oh, we could do this. And I take out my computer and I'm like typing. But yeah, it's a kuleana that I know that I have to do. And so be on standby.
Yes, we're going to have to do another episode, Darcy, at some point down the line, because we have to hear at some point, what this rollout is going to look and sound and feel like. So yeah, that's great. So, hey, everybody, stay with us. After this short break, we will continue our conversation with Darciann Baker.
Hi, friends. Toy Hirschman here from the Entre Ed Talk podcast. I am super excited to support the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast hosted by none other than the amazing Josh Rappoon. And I also want to give a big shout out to all of the incredible educators in Hawaii who are doing unreal things in the entrepreneurship and design-based thinking spaces. I hope you all subscribe and listen to What School Could Be in Hawaii. And also, hey, why not check out the Entre Ed Talk podcast, where we interview stellar entrepreneurial educators and entrepreneurs from across the country and globe. I cannot wait to connect with you.
Aloha, my name is Aaron Shorn, a previous guest on this very podcast. I am also now head of growth and community at Hawaii's own Unruler. Unruler is a collaborative mobile and web platform that accelerates innovation, grows culture and community, and celebrates learning. Learners post multimedia, tag their learning, and through comments are able to work together asynchronously. Each post is a moment of learning that forms the foundation of a joyous learning journey. We can be found at unrulr.com. Mahalo.
Hey everyone, this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast, and we are back with Darciann Baker, a K-12 Hawaiian language coach at the Kamehameha Schools Hawaiʻi Island campus in Kea'au. So Darcy, in this section, I want to dig deeper into pedagogy and your practice as a teacher and coach, hoping, of course, that our listeners might be sparked by the insights you offer. So I want to move beyond the why and to more about the how. So you came into the Kealaʻula Professional Development Program thinking about ways to explore the use of space and classroom design in your teaching, but over time, I learned you realized your teaching itself needed to change. So what sparked your interest in classroom space and design, and what realizations did you come to about your teaching practice as you thought about space and design?
Oh, that's a great question. I think what sparked my interest in classroom design is just looking at looking at my students' faces as they sat in their nice rows.
Yeah.
And I didn't like the idea of my students being passive recipients of my all-knowing, right? And I wanted them to be more active participants in learning. And so again, here comes this guilt part, right? How many years did I go through having my students in these nice little rows? And so I started exploring with just the tables, because I only had tables in my room. And I don't know if Evan told you, but I had this huge room. It was the hugest room on campus. It was large. And I was the envy of a lot of teachers because my classroom space was humongous. Then I started thinking, what could I do with these spaces? I started going on to Facebook Marketplace looking for cheap furniture. I started spending some of my budget on beanbags and floor pillows. And and I started taking desks away or moving them or out to the side so that my students would have more comfortable spaces and that it would feel more like a home, where they would feel more comfortable in their learning. Of course, there was learning in that because some students got way too comfortable.
Yes.
On a table. Sorry. You need to get back on a table. But there was a lot of learning in that. The students enjoyed it. I would give instruction kind of like elementary school. You sit in the circle on the floor. We always took our shoes off, but I'd give instruction on the floor and say, you guys know what to do, go. And they could choose wherever they wanted to go to learn. And like I was saying, there's a lot of learning in that. Like I saw what didn't work, what worked. The kids gave me feedback. That was beautiful. But then, like you said, your pedagogy has to change in order for that to happen. You can't have kids on beanbags and then you're on the board explaining. That's why I needed to do that circle in front first. I need to have your attention. This is what we're doing. This is what this is what we're learning. Now go. And I would have stations. Sometimes I would have stations and they would independently go to those stations and do their learning there. Other times I would give them assignments and, you go ahead and pick your most comfortable spot. And there were, of course, students who chose the desks. They wanted to be on a desk and other students wanted to lay down and it was okay with me. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I went through, again, a similar experience when I went from Punahou to La Pietra. That was the moment where I started to reconfigure my classroom. And since I was headed in the direction of in teaching history and also Hawaiian studies and economics, of a more Socratic seminar approach, that it was more discussion based, then almost immediately I had to convert the classroom into a different shape, which was more like a boardroom. The kids were sitting around this board table having these discussions. But later, when I was teaching at Iolani, I discovered something called the node chair. They're expensive, but the concept is that they roll and they do all sorts of other things. And just the very idea that a desk or a student chair can be unhooked from the ground, it's not bolted into the floor, was magic. And we brought a bunch of them on campus. And I saw some teachers who taught in the traditional manner for decades. All of a sudden, it was shocking. It was like they became symphony conductors, and the kids were moving around the room in these chairs. But to your point, lots of very complex and interesting things happen when you just take a small step and say, well, maybe it doesn't have to be the chairs all in a row, right? Yeah. So Darcy, along the same lines, you've traveled to and spent time researching schools and programs in New Zealand and Singapore, among other places. Like, what cool pedagogical ideas did you end up bringing back in your suitcase from those travels?
Oh, wow. My first trip to look at schools was with Kalei A'arona, and we went to San Francisco. And we were able to see different schools. And I remember my focus, like you said, was on flexible learning spaces. And we were able to see kind of like what I was trying to do in my classroom. And it validated what I was trying to do. Gosh, we went to Singapore American School, and it was just a quick 5-day trip. And my focus there was really on the language classes. And that kind of helped to spark the changes that we are going through now. But I also did see flexible learning spaces there. And I thought, wow, I remember walking to a first year Spanish class. It was middle school. And he didn't have any desks.
Wow.
He had no desks. He had a big mat and he had different learning spaces. And I just stood there in awe. And, this was before anybody on our campus had shifted. I was dabbling. People were, my colleagues were like, what are you doing? And very skeptical. But I just remember all the pictures he had on the wall. I mean, talk about the wall being a second teacher.
Yeah.
He was able to do that. And you didn't see any English. There was no translations. He had booklets, pamphlets. He had everything. That was my dream class right there. And the students were first year students. They were speaking in Spanish. They were working independently. Oh, it was just a dream. I remember walking into a second grade classroom. It was Spanish. And I remember these kids just speaking in Spanish. And it wasn't an immersion class. I'm like, what? They come to you, 3 times a week? And they're in second grade and they're doing this? Did they come to you with any Spanish background? No. How do you do this? And they were, he had desks, but he also had that open floor space like I did. And I was like, okay, this can work. This really can work. My trip to New Zealand, when we went to look at schools, the focus there was really on culture-based learning.
Yeah.
How do you get the students to really connect to their culture and building up their identity as Maori students? I remember there thinking that the Maori culture is very widely accepted. And we went to a school where the students were not primarily Maori, but there was a welcome ceremony and they did haka. And I thought, wow, why is that not as widely accepted in Hawaii? Why does Hawaiian kind of come across as, and my students show this, a touristy thing? Like if I tell my students, you know the word aloha, you know the word mahalo, just use them already, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when they do that, they kind of mimic this like, aloha.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, why are you doing that? Because that's where they hear it. They hear that this aloha spirit in the tourist industry, that's where it lives. No, it doesn't live there. It needs to live with us,
Mm-hmm.
And so going on this trip to New Zealand kind of emphasized that for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, this needs to live with us. It doesn't belong to the tourist industry. Yeah.
So it sounds like, what was one of the things that was going on in your travels is that you were coming to the realization and being sparked by the idea that there were a multiplicity of approaches, and that for all of these decades that there's been sort of a monolithic approach to language, which was the kids lined up in rows and, the teacher was filling them up with specific kind of structures and grammar and vocabulary. You were seeing all of these different kinds of approaches. And then, since you were already at Y already, you understood the Y, then you were you were like, at a buffet. It was like, which one of these little meals do I want to take a bite of and try, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's one of the reasons why, I think if we were to come up with a giant pot of money, part of the way I would want to spend it is to actually send teachers to other schools, that travel is super valuable, right? When you get to go to other places and see what other people are doing, there's so much that you can gain from that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because, seeing it for yourself is very different than telling somebody what you saw.
Right. Or seeing it in a movie or something like they're in a film clip. Yeah. When you're there, like when you're in that second grade classroom, you're just like, oh my God, this is crazy. So yeah.
And coming back to tell your colleagues, like, this can happen. I saw it.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of skepticism.
Yeah. So Darcy, I want to zoom out a little bit to include all educators of all subjects. So in one of your resource websites, you cited Matt Miller's Ditch That Textbook resource, and you wrote as a descriptor, this PD is filled with ideas of how to tap into your creativity to bring your lessons alive. And Ditch That Textbook is not specific to world languages, but rather for educators in general. But a lot of what you will hear will be directly applicable to your lesson planning. That's what you wrote. So let's say Josh, the traditional history teacher, wants to have coffee with you. And over coffee, he asks about ditching his textbook and moving more towards a proficiency and authentic assessments model of teaching. And I'm going to make this a little more challenging by adding in Jackie, who joins us for this coffee talk story. And she teaches biology in the traditional way and cannot imagine, quote, ditching the textbook. So how would you, the coach, begin the conversation? Where would you like this conversation to go? What should its shape be?
The strategies that I learned in ditching that textbook really has a lot to do with engaging the students in the learning. And I think I talked about this earlier about having students being active participants in their learning rather than passive recipients. And in Ditch That Textbook, what he does, he shares a lot of strategies that really get students involved in engaging with the content of your class. Mm-hmm. He works alongside with Dave Burgess, and Dave Burgess is the author of Teach Like a Pirate.
Okay.
And Teach Like a Pirate is also that type of book where you get your students involved and really working with the content and getting them excited about it. And ditching that textbook, you move away from going from page 1 to page 10, right? And then tomorrow we'll do page 11 to page 18 or whatever.
Right.
You move away from that. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't ever touch it. You could also, you could use it as a reference. But how do you take that content and really make it relevant for your students? And I'm a firm believer in backwards design. And the interesting thing about backwards design is when you first hear about it, it makes a lot of sense, but trying to understand how it works, it's a work in progress. It's the curve. It's a steep learning curve. Well, it was for myself, but really understanding, okay, what is it that you want students to learn? how are they going to show evidence of that? And then going back and saying, now what do they need to be able to perform that?
Mm-hmm.
And then this textbook, Teach Like a Pirate. This is where their intelligence comes in and what they have to share, because it's about building your lessons. How do you build your lessons so that they get what you need them to get so they can perform on that assessment that you have decided is allowable, to evidence their learning. And so it's not necessarily so much about you need to memorize this, and regurgitate it. It's really about how are they going to really learn this content, show it to you so that it's not just purely memorized and regurgitated. And that's what I love about this textbook and Teach Like a Pirate.
So if you and I are sitting here and we're having this talk story, and we'll set Jackie aside for a second because that makes it way more complicated. But, I'm teaching history and I'm realizing that rather than, say, for example, wanting my kids to understand the timeline that led to the American Civil War, what I really want them to be able to do is to explain why we got into the Civil War. And so the conversion that I'm going through in this moment listening to you is that instead of giving them a timeline of facts, what I want them to do is to, say, for example, read all of the correspondence that was written by President Lincoln 2 weeks before the war started, and to try to tease out of that correspondence the reasons that he gave or the thinking that he was going through as he was contemplating taking the country to war. I know it seems kind of cheesy, but I'm on the right track, right? In terms of ditching the textbook, right, Coach?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has to do with kind of like what I was talking about earlier, your learning targets. What is a target? Is there a target that they memorize the events, or is the target that they understand or that they are able to explain why these events led to each other, right? And so if those targets are crystal clear, then understanding what assessments will be acceptable in evidencing their learning will be easier to write. And so once you write that assessment, then you go back and say, okay, I need them to do this. They're going to explain to me whether it's going to be in a video or it's going to be in an essay or it's going to be in a debate. Whatever you've decided is their acceptable evidence, now you go back and say, now, how am I going to get them to understand that?
Right. Yeah, that's so awesome. I mean, you know, part of the reason why I was sparked into this is because you wrote about it in grad school. And it was very much a kind of a light bulb moment for me as I was reading what you were saying about learning targets versus learning objectives. Yeah. So I encourage our listeners to do maybe your own research, Google learning targets. There's a lot out there about it and it's super interesting. So that's great. So, hey everyone, stay with us. We will be back in a moment with more from Darciann Baker, known as Kumu Lenani.
This is Guy Kawasaki. If you want to learn how to be a remarkable person, please check out my podcast, Remarkable People. I interview people like Roy Yamaguchi, Margaret Atwood, Jane Goodall, Stephen Wolfram, Steven Pinker, Ariana Huffington, and Steve Wozniak. The point of the podcast is to help you become a little bit more remarkable. To learn more, go to remarkablepeople.com. Thank you.
As a What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast listener, I know you're curious about what's happening in Hawaii's schools. This is Christy Oda, and together with National Board Certified Teachers, we launched Educator's Edge, a new podcast that gathers innovative educators with diverse perspectives to collaborate around a topic of their choice. There's something so special about hearing teachers talk story about the work they do to transform education for Hawaii's young learners. I invite you to listen on Apple, Spotify, Google, or Anchor, or go to bit.ly/educatorsedge to subscribe. Aloha and mahalo.
Hey everyone, this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast, and we're back with Darciann Baker, known as Kumu Lenani, who, among many other things, mentors and coaches Hawaiian language teachers, so that they might be highly effective in their proficiency-based practice. So Darcy, in this last section, I want to cover several things, I think, which might be important to our listeners. So the first is the concept of Oiwi Edge, which empowers your campus learners and educators with a, quote, worldview and mindsets to actively shape a rapidly changing world with vision, courage, and aloha. So if I graduate from your school, Darcy, after 12 years with the Oiwi Edge, who am I and who could I be as I grow into my future? And I guess I'm going to test the waters here and use a computer metaphor. What would be my Oiwi Edge operating system as I graduate from Kamehameha Schools Hawaiʻi Island and head off into my life?
So Oiwi Edge, that was such a, when that concept was brought to us, we were for a couple of years like, what does that mean, Oiwi Edge? What does it mean? And nobody would give us an exact definition. And it was frustrating for us because, we're like, how are we going to make our students, have that Oiwi Edge when we don't even know what it is? And so, that trip to New Zealand was kind of part of defining what Oiwi Edge is and how we get our students to understand this and really become, I don't like this term, but become Oiwi Edgers, right? And so the way that I see Oiwi Edge is really for us giving our students a firm foundation in who they are as Kanaka, whether it's in Mo'olelo, whether it's in your family history, whether it's Olelo Hawaii, but really giving them a firm foundation, but with eyes out in the future and out into the world. Yeah. Knowing that no matter what path you choose in your life, that having that Oiwi, that Kanaka foundation is going to ground you. It's going to ground you, but it's also going to give you an insight into how you navigate your future, learning from our kupuna. So what does that mean? There are so many examples out there, actually, but in whatever you choose to do in your future, that you understand that you come from a people. And of course, recognizing that our students are not pure Hawaiian, right? But as a student at Kamehameha Schools, that is where our kuleana lands, is to teach you who you are as a Hawaiian and who you are as a whole, and how that's going to move you forward in whatever you choose to do and serve your people, if that makes any sense.
And so the part I'm interested in as well is the courage part. I quoted changing world with vision, courage, and aloha. So what is the practice along the journey for the student to gain that Oiwi Edge in terms of courage? Like, I know must be really hard to describe to people. Yeah.
Yeah. Really, it's an effort on all of the part of all of our teachers, whether it's in English or in science, to really give them the wings to explore their talents and their interests. So, thinking toward, like, say, for example, theater.
Yeah.
If you have a student who's interested in theater, now how do you get them to first understand that field? And how do you encourage them to use their identity to explore that field with a Kanaka mindset?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, in some respects, theater is something pretty clear to me. I mean, for me to be interested in theater and actually do theater would take incredible courage on my part to get through that, because I'm shy. And I know that sounds crazy, but introverted. But when I think about, like, what does it mean to be courageous in biology? What does it mean to be courageous in history? Is courage in biology having the opportunity from my teacher to tackle the really thorny issue of climate change. Or in history, is it the opportunity to speak out about culture and ethnicity and things that tend to be hot button issues? Yeah. So what I'm hearing from you is that it's really incumbent upon everyone at Kamehameha Schools Hawaiʻi Island campus to engage the kids in learning that does present opportunities to exercise your courage. Am I on the right track?
Absolutely. And as kumu, everybody's on a different space on the spectrum of understanding Oiwi Edge. And as kumu, you too need to have that courage, right? To jump into that. Because, as kumu Olelo Hawaii, historically speaking, we've been given all of the kuleana to address anything Hawaiian. And that's something that we've discussed before. Like, okay, when there's something that needs to be done, they need to do a prayer or go see your kumu Olelo Hawaii.
Yeah.
Right? Or, you need to go and research a plant or go talk to your kumu Olelo Hawaii or whatever that is, right? And it's a heavy burden for us. And so having this Oiwi Edge platform, it's freeing for us, I guess, in a way, in that we're sharing this kuleana. And this kuleana of giving our students this identity and foundation and really moving them along on this path is now everybody's kuleana.
Yeah.
And that's so it's nice for us. And we can really concentrate on Olelo Hawaii. But like I said, like everybody's on that different spectrum. Everybody's trying to explore it and give their students ways in which they can tap into those interests and really think, how do I serve my lahui through this? Yeah. I have students who are going off and they follow law. Yeah. But they want to do law and serve the lahui. So how do I practice law in the best way to serve my people? Right. And that's that courage that you're talking about, courage to go out there and address those issues that affect us.
Yeah. I understood that as I went through my conversion and teaching history, is that I knew that there were kids who wanted to study the law or be in the law. And so therefore it was incumbent upon me to put them in historical situations that involved the law. And then they had the opportunity to be sparked by it, to understand what the complexities of the law are. So I hear you loud and clear. So Darcy, down here at the very end, wow, this time has gone by so fast. I have one more question for you, and it's a big one. I want to zoom up to a very high altitude, to the where the jet planes fly, the 32,000 foot level, and look down on the education landscape below. And so here at the end of 2021, what are your thoughts on the landscape of learning in Hawaii or on Hawaii Island?
Wow.
Yeah.
We live in a world that's changing. And for educators, we, like I'm now in that category of old timers. And as an old timer, it's, we tend to go like, well, we didn't need that when we were growing up and we turned out just fine, right?
Yeah.
But as educators, we need to understand that this world is changing and that we need to adapt to that. And we need to understand our students and their place in this world that wasn't our world before, right?
Yeah.
And that's globally. When I think about Hawaii Island, there's so many issues going on. And so to be able to address current issues going on in our world, just taking our pandemic, right? It's a huge thing. There's something that we never had to grow up with, right? And how do you navigate this for students? It's opening our minds. It's opening our thoughts to what's going on today right in front of us, and knowing that this is the world that our students are going through.
Yeah. And
that we need to understand that. And it's not the world that we grew up in. And so, oh gosh, for, as a parent having younger children, even just the vocabulary that they use, right? As a teacher, you need to navigate that. If they're talking about something, you need to know what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it might sound like an innocent word, but when you find out what they're really talking about, it's like, wait.
Yeah.
So keeping up with their music, keeping up with their language, keeping up with what's going on social media, those are things that for an older teacher, it's a learning curve for us, right? And then being able to exist in their world, even though it's not, not what we grew up in, but being able to exist in their world and adapt our teaching to that, that's the key.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I did an interview a few weeks ago with Wes Adkins, who teaches at James Campbell High School out on West Oahu. And this is what he talked about. In fact, at the very end of the interview, he talked about meeting the kids where they're at. That was his phrase. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is that we need to understand the world that they're living in. If you're a chemistry teacher, Darcy, and you're still having your kids just every day go to page 35 and memorize the table of elements, and you're not acknowledging what's going on in the world today with them, then, you're not giving them the OEV edge, right? You're just not. And also, I was also thinking, that what a special moment, because a few weeks ago, our Department of Education for the state named its 2022 State Teacher of the Year. And it's Whitney Aragaki from Waiakea High School. And her emphasis in teaching is in place and culture. And I'm like, we've reached a magic moment, Darcy, It's not necessarily the teacher whose, kids are all going to college or following that track or getting great test scores or Sterling Scholars or all of that. It's actually somebody who's connecting her kids to the place and culture of Hawaii Island. And how awesome is that, right? I mean, I just think, yeah. So that's great. So Darcy, thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. I hope you and your family and extended family remain safe and healthy as we transition to the new year 2022.
I'm looking forward to good things in 2022.
Yes, I am too. Take care.
Mahalo nui.
My editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurahara. Our theme music comes from the vast catalog of music created by my friend of 40 years, the remarkable pianist Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all the other major music platforms. You can also find his work at his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and over 2,000 cities to date. Support these episodes with remarkable, innovative, and imaginative educators and education leaders by giving us your own rating and writing us a review at your favorite podcast store. This series is funded by education change agent Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the acclaimed documentary film Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book What School Could Be. Please join the What School Could Be virtual community by going to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or by downloading the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to mltsinhawaii@gmail.com and follow us on Twitter at mltsinhawaii and at Josh Rapoon. Finally, please like our Most Likely to Succeed in Hawaii Facebook page and YouTube channel. Friends, even as COVID infection numbers decline, stay safe and please get vaccinated. Most of all, bring kindness and compassion into the world. We need a surplus of both right now. Until the next episode, ahui ho and take care.